A black woman boards a first-class flight in silence. She smiles politely, shows her boarding pass, and takes her seat. Minutes later, she's told she doesn't belong there. Not because of an error, not because of policy, but because someone assumed she couldn't possibly have earned it. What happens next doesn't erupt in shouting or chaos, it erupts in history. Who is Vivian Hart, this quiet, composed CEO who calmly refused to move? Why did her silence strike harder than a scream? And how did one moment in Seat 4A change the airline industry forever? This isn't just a story about flying. It's about what happens when dignity is denied at 30,000 feet and how one woman turned discrimination into systemic change. Behind every calm voice lies a storm. And today, you're about to witness one that rewrote the skies. Before we begin this powerful journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring stories that matter to screens around the world. Now, let's board Flight UA221 and see what happened when the world told Vivian Hart to move, and she didn't. Vivian Hart settled comfortably into Seat 4A, her usual spot in Unity Airlines' business-class cabin. The gentle hum of the aircraft preparing for departure filled the air, mingling softly with whispers of passengers boarding behind her. Vivian closed her eyes momentarily, feeling the calm anticipation she always experienced just before takeoff. She adjusted her linen blazer slightly, its fabric a soothing blend of softness and authority, and placed her worn leather tote neatly beneath her seat. It was early morning at Chicago O'Hare Airport, and a golden glow of sunrise seeped gently through the window, touching Vivian's caramel skin warmly. For a moment, the world seemed still, manageable, fair. Vivian allowed herself this fleeting sense of peace, knowing well the day ahead would demand her full strength. As CEO of Hart Capital Partners, she'd grown accustomed to commanding boardrooms filled with skepticism. Yet somehow, it was always these quiet moments on airplanes where she felt most powerful and most herself. Suddenly, the ambient peace fractured. Footsteps approached hurriedly, purposeful and slightly intrusive. Vivian opened her eyes slowly to see a man in his early 40s standing in the aisle next to her seat. His name badge read clearly, Logan Powell, Supervisor. His posture conveyed confidence bordering arrogance, the practiced demeanor of a man accustomed to authority. "Ms. Hart, I'm sorry to disturb you," Logan said, his tone stiff, the polite veneer thinly masking impatience. "Your seat assignment has been changed. We'll need you to move back to the economy cabin." Vivian's heart rate quickened momentarily, but she steadied herself instantly. Her eyes fixed on Logan's, assessing quietly, carefully. "I'm sorry," Vivian replied softly, her voice controlled and clear, yet touched gently with genuine confusion. She retrieved her boarding pass, holding it between delicate fingers. "This seat is correct. I booked it personally." Logan didn't glance at her boarding pass. Instead, his gaze briefly shifted towards a white man standing just behind him. Tall, middle-aged, wearing a designer watch that glittered under the cabin lights. Vivian saw the silent acknowledgement pass between them, a subtle nod carrying unspoken authority. Her pulse quickened again, this time with recognition rather than confusion. This seat was reassigned due to a last-minute elite passenger adjustment, Logan explained bluntly. "We apologize for any inconvenience." A tension, quiet yet palpable, thickened around them. Vivian felt the eyes of other passengers shift toward her, silent curiosity blending with awkward discomfort. She inhaled slowly, steadying her heart and emotions, choosing her response carefully. "Mr. Powell," Vivian began, her voice calm yet firm, each word deliberate. "I booked this flight weeks ago under my corporate account. There must be a misunderstanding." Logan's face remained impassive, unmoved by her gentle challenge. His eyes darted briefly toward a flight attendant who approached cautiously from behind. The attendant, young and visibly nervous, avoided Vivian's gaze entirely, looking instead at Logan for guidance. "Ms. Hart," Logan said again, the polite mask slipping further into impatience. "I'll have to ask you again to vacate this seat immediately. The reassignment is final. We appreciate your cooperation." Around Vivian, passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman in seat 5B subtly lifted her phone, starting to record. Another passenger, a young man near the front, glanced anxiously between Vivian and Logan, clearly uncertain of what was happening. Vivian noticed all of it, silently processing each glance, each subtle shift of posture, each whispered word. She considered fighting it, considered raising her voice, calling attention to this blatant disrespect, yet her instincts urged her differently. Years of experience taught Vivian that true power rarely demanded volume. Instead, she simply nodded once, calm, controlled, and began collecting her belongings. As Vivian stood up, she felt a wave of silent indignation ripple through the cabin. Passengers' eyes flickered between confusion and quiet outrage. Logan Powell stood slightly aside, barely hiding a triumphant smirk, unaware of how deeply he had misread the woman before him. Slowly, Vivian moved down the aisle toward economy. Each step echoed quietly with dignity rather than defeat. Passengers parted subtly, their eyes tracing her every step. As she reached the seat Logan had indicated, 21C, a young man occupying seat 21B stood immediately, his expression mortified. "I'm sorry," he murmured quietly, compassion evident in his eyes. Vivian simply nodded gently, offering him a faint yet grateful smile. "It's all right," she replied softly, her tone quiet, composed. Settling into the narrower seat, Vivian quietly arranged her tote beneath her. She drew a steadying breath, feeling the quiet anger building in her chest, yet she refused to let it show outwardly. Instead, she withdrew her phone from her tote. Vivian hesitated briefly, her finger poised over her contacts. Her heart wrestled with itself in silence. Was this the right choice? To respond decisively. Immediately, could a measured silence achieve more than action? Yet, in her heart, Vivian knew some wrongs demanded immediate correction. She dialed quickly, calmly, her expression never faltering. A voice answered swiftly on the other side, crisp and ready. Vivian came the question, gentle, expectant. "Malcolm," Vivian replied softly but firmly, her voice steady, carrying an undercurrent of resolve. "Activate Clause B7 immediately." "Understood," Malcolm answered, no hesitation in his tone. Vivian ended the call quietly, slipping the phone back into her bag, around her. The cabin buzzed with quiet uncertainty. Passengers exchanged glances, the young man beside her casting subtle, respectful looks in her direction, sensing something significant had transpired. Vivian sat quietly, eyes closed once more, breathing softly as the aircraft engines began to hum louder. She visualized the days ahead clearly, the meetings, negotiations, and confrontations inevitably arising from this moment. Her mind, sharp and focused, prepared itself calmly, strategically, yet beneath the strength, beneath the composed exterior. Vivian allowed herself a moment of sadness, quiet and fleeting. She had built an entire career fighting assumptions about her place, her worth. Now here she was again, still forced to defend what she'd earned. It was exhausting, infuriating, but also clarifying. Vivian knew change often required confronting uncomfortable truths. As Flight UA221 began taxiing slowly towards the runway, Vivian opened her eyes gently. Her resolve hardened silently, clearly. The seat she'd left behind no longer mattered. She understood something. Logan Powell and the airline soon, which she wasn't simply another passenger. She was Vivian Hart, and she was ready to rewrite the rules. Vivian sat quietly, her thoughts simmering beneath the steady hum of the plane's engines as Unity Airlines Flight UA221 climbed smoothly above the clouds. The soft morning sunlight drifted gently through the small window, illuminating the familiar, worn leather of her tote tucked beneath the seat in front of her. Around her, passengers shuffled uneasily in the narrow aisles, adjusting to their seats, unaware of the deep turbulence brewing silently inside Vivian's heart. Beside her, the young man who had apologized earlier shifted nervously. He glanced over at Vivian every few minutes, clearly wrestling with whether to speak or remain silent. Finally, he gathered enough courage, his voice quiet yet sincere. I really am sorry about what happened," he murmured softly, glancing hesitantly toward her. "He shouldn't have done that." Vivian looked at him with genuine kindness, sensing the sincerity behind his words. His name tag, attached to a briefcase tucked beneath the seat, read simply Ethan Collins. He appeared fresh out of college, earnest eyes bright with youthful idealism. "Thank you, Ethan," Vivian said gently, her voice soothing yet firm. "But it's not your apology to make." Ethan's expression shifted slightly, reflecting quiet embarrassment. He lowered his eyes momentarily, nodding his understanding. The silence that followed settled between them like a delicate layer of snow, soft yet heavy with unspoken emotion. A few rows ahead, Jasmine Carter, a 20-year-old student heading home from college, watched Vivian discreetly from the corner of her eye. Jasmine had recognized Vivian immediately, recalling her unmistakable presence from a Forbes article she had studied in her business ethics class just weeks earlier. Vivian Hart was a force, a visionary leader celebrated for her relentless advocacy for equality in corporate America. Jasmine's pulse quickened, realizing she'd witnessed firsthand something extraordinary and deeply unsettling. Quietly, Jasmine pulled out her phone, typing quickly into her search bar, "Vivian Hart, CEO, Hart Capital Partners, Unity Airlines." Images flooded her screen instantly, Vivian's calm and commanding face appearing again and again. Jasmine felt a mix of awe and indignation swell within her. She leaned subtly toward her friend seated beside her, whispering urgently, "Do you have any idea who that woman is?" Her friend, Alyssa, looked back uncertainly. "Who?" "The woman they just moved." "Yes," Jasmine said softly, urgency coloring her voice. "That's Vivian Hart. She's a CEO, one of the most influential women in finance. She practically owns a chunk of this airline." Alyssa's eyes widened, realization dawning quickly. "Wait, seriously? Why did they move her?" Jasmine shook her head, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Exactly. Why behind them?" Another passenger, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, quietly pulled up her camera app, subtly filming toward seat 21C. Sarah had noticed the tension and had quietly begun recording moments earlier. She sensed instinctively that something significant had transpired, something worth capturing. Sarah titled her video discreetly, "Black Woman CEO Moved from Business Class to Economy for White Passenger Unity. Airlines UA221. The whispers quickly multiplied throughout the cabin, creating an electric yet invisible web of tension. Conversations became muted yet persistent. Passengers exchanging uneasy glances, trying to piece together what exactly had happened. Back in business class, Logan Powell had resumed his duties as supervisor, handing out warm towels and drinks with forced pleasantries. His smile remained intact, a carefully curated mask hiding the faint unease building slowly within him. A quiet thought nagged at the back of his mind, a question he stubbornly refused to acknowledge had he made a serious mistake, seated comfortably now in seat 4A. Richard Owens, the wealthy businessman whose late arrival had prompted the seat reassignment, sipped his coffee obliviously. His eyes scanned lazily through his emails, entirely unaware of the growing ripple effect behind him. Occasionally, he glanced casually over his shoulder, sensing curious eyes upon him, yet dismissing it as mere envy or idle curiosity. Maria Salazar, the flight attendant assigned to economy, quietly approached seat 21C. Her heart beat rapidly as she considered her next words. Maria had worked for Unity Airlines nearly a decade, often witnessing uncomfortable decisions made by her supervisors. But something about this particular incident deeply unsettled her. Approaching Vivian gently, Maria lowered her voice, compassion evident. "Ms. Hart," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I get you anything? Water, coffee?" Vivian's eyes met Maria's warmly, recognizing the genuine care hidden behind her nervous demeanor. "No, thank you," Vivian replied gently. Her voice carried a quiet strength, offering Maria reassurance amidst the uncertainty. Maria hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but simply nodded respectfully before moving on. In the cockpit, Captain Mark Bishop adjusted his headset, preparing for routine communication with air traffic control. His co-pilot, Aaron Mills, quietly reviewed the flight path. A sudden alert buzzed quietly through the internal radio, breaking the comfortable routine. "Captain Bishop," a voice crackled softly yet urgently. "We have an internal request flagged as priority. Please confirm immediately." Mark Bishop's brow furrowed slightly, puzzled by the unexpected communication. He activated his radio, responding carefully, confirming. "What's the priority request?" A brief pause filled the cockpit with tense anticipation before the voice responded cautiously, its tone unusually firm. "Passenger Vivian Hart, seat 21C. You're instructed to treat her as a Tier 0 account holder immediately. Await further instructions upon landing." Mark exchanged a bewildered glance with Aaron. Tier 0. In all his years of service, he had never encountered such a designation. Instinctively, he sensed trouble. Meanwhile, Logan Powell's tablet flashed discreetly with a red notification. He glanced down, reading quickly. His blood ran cold. The message was clear and uncompromising. Immediate action required passenger Vivian Hart, corporate relations status, priority alert. Logan felt a sudden dizziness grip him, his earlier confidence draining swiftly away. Quietly, he walked toward the galley, breathing unevenly, panic now growing unchecked within him. In economy. Vivian sat perfectly still, eyes closed gently. Her mind raced, reviewing the decisions ahead. Her phone buzzed softly inside her bag, a notification she already knew awaited her attention. She hesitated briefly, reflecting quietly on the emotional toll ahead. Vivian understood clearly the gravity of her next steps, the disruption she was about to create. She contemplated briefly, allowing herself to question the wisdom of her actions, knowing once she moved forward, there would be no turning back. Opening her eyes, Vivian took her phone out quietly, reading the message calmly. Malcolm had texted back swiftly, Clause B7 activated, board notified, awaiting your further instructions. Vivian exhaled softly, steadying herself once more. Around her, whispers continued. Passengers unaware they were witnessing a defining moment quietly unfolding. Vivian glanced briefly toward Ethan beside her. She noted his quiet embarrassment, recognizing in him the uncertainty many felt when confronting issues of justice. She offered him a gentle smile, her strength returning, reaffirming her resolve. Vivian typed quickly, her fingers steady, her message brief yet decisive. Prepare immediate governance review, full compliance audit of Unity Airlines, no delays. She clicked send quietly, leaning back slowly into her seat. A quiet certainty settled upon her now, calm and reassuring amidst the turbulence she had set in motion. Vivian Hart understood well the price of leadership, the cost of challenging unfairness head-on. But in her heart, she also knew clearly something Logan Powell and Unity Airlines had profoundly misunderstood. True power was rarely found in authority alone, but in quiet integrity and unwavering principle. As the plane continued westward toward Los Angeles, Vivian closed her eyes once more, prepared for the inevitable confrontation waiting patiently ahead. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as Flight UA221 reached cruising altitude. Trays clinked softly. A cart wheeled its way down the narrow aisle, guided by Kelsey Monroe, the younger of the two flight attendants, her hands slightly trembling. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but her mind refused to calm. It wasn't just that she had watched Logan Powell remove a calm, dignified black woman from her seat in business class. It was the way it had happened, deliberate, mechanical, without question. And now, whispers were circling the cabin, passengers filming quietly, conversations pinging across devices. Kelsey knew something was happening beneath the surface. Something she had been a part of, and she felt unmoored. Near the galley, Maria Salazar rubbed her hands together quietly, feeling the dryness in her palms. She had served Vivian Hart before, maybe once or twice in the past. She remembered her not for any airs or special treatment, but for her grace, the kind of presence that filled a room without speaking. And now Maria had just stood by as she was demoted to a seat near the back. For a man in a designer watch with an impatient scowl and a name that didn't even appear in the manifest until the final hour. Maria opened her service drawer slowly, breathing through the tension in her chest. She thought about her teenage daughter, about the kind of world she wanted her to inherit. Then she glanced down the aisle toward seat 21C. Vivian sat still, back straight, hands resting gently on her lap, no phone in hand, no fuss, just silence. But it was the kind of silence that carried weight. In the flight deck, Captain Mark Bishop reviewed his messages again. The term Tier 0 glared back at him from the screen, accompanied by an advisory directive. Do not engage, do not deplane, await further instructions. This wasn't standard protocol. In 25 years, Mark had never seen a designation like it. VIP, sure. Elite frequent flyer. Absolutely. But this was different. Aaron, the co-pilot, leaned slightly over. "You think it's real?" he asked under his breath. Mark didn't answer right away. He reached for the printed manifest, cross-referencing the name manually, Vivian M. Hart. There it was, confirmed. Seat 4A originally, status corporate partner tier, a notation at the bottom in bold red font, "Do not reassign without authorization." Mark swallowed. She was bumped. Aaron murmured quietly, "For Owens." Mark nodded grimly. "And now we've got a storm on board." Back in the main cabin, Vivian opened her tote bag slowly and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Its edges were worn, the spine soft from years of use. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, slanted handwriting. She flipped past older pages, conference notes, investment calculations, stray poetry lines until she reached the first blank page. She clicked her pen once and paused. Her hand hovered above the page, motionless. She wasn't sure what to write. Vivian had built her entire career on clarity of mission, of communication, of intention. But now, as the jet glided above a patchwork of clouds, she felt something new threading itself through her chest. Not rage, not even betrayal, just a tight, aching silence. One she knew too well. One she'd experienced in different forms since the first time a bank teller looked past her to greet the man behind her. Since the first time an investor mistook her for an assistant. Since the first time she was told she was impressive for a woman like you. She'd learned to breathe through it, to outpace it, to rise, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Still, today felt heavier because it had happened at 35,000 feet, where everyone saw and no one spoke. Her pen finally touched the paper. Witnesses weren't absent. They were silent. She paused, then wrote beneath it, "What is power if not the ability to insist on your own presence?" Just then, a quiet voice to her right interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Hart," Jasmine said carefully. Vivian turned slightly. Jasmine's eyes were wide but respectful. Her phone clutched tightly in her lap. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Jasmine added quickly, "but I know who you are. I saw what happened, and it wasn't right. I just wanted to say, I see you." Vivian's expression softened. She didn't speak right away. Then she gave a small nod, her voice low and full. "Thank you," she said, simply. Jasmine's eyes welled briefly. She looked away, embarrassed by her own emotions, but something had cracked open between them, something quiet, affirming. Across the aisle, an older woman who had been silently observing from seat 20D leaned forward slightly. "She's not the only one who sees you," she whispered. Vivian looked over, surprised. The woman gave a small, respectful smile. "You didn't have to yell for us to feel the shift in the room." Vivian blinked slowly. This was new. This was different. Back in the galley, Logan Powell gripped the metal edge of the counter, trying to still his shaking hands. His work tablet buzzed again. This time it was a message from corporate relations. Immediate attention required incident with Tier 0 passenger. Executive monitoring in progress. Prepare preliminary report. He looked up, sweat forming along his hairline. Kelsey, who had just returned from the cabin, saw the expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice low. Logan didn't answer. Instead, he glanced down toward the back of the plane, where the passenger he had dismissed now sat surrounded by silent respect. "I think," he started, then stopped. "I think we're in trouble." In seat 21C. Vivian finally closed her notebook, slipping it back into her tote. The words were enough, not for justice, not yet, but enough for now. A beginning. Her phone buzzed softly again, another message from Malcolm. Board contacted, legal team assembling, advisory clause in effect. She replied with just 2 words: "Pull contracts." Ethan beside her shifted again, clearly sensing the shift. He cleared his throat softly. "Ms. Hart." She turned. "I've never seen anyone handle something like that the way you did." Vivian smiled faintly, sadness flickering beneath it. "Sometimes," she said, "the calmest person in the room is the one holding back the flood." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure what else to say. The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came through, tight and formal. "We'll begin our descent into Los Angeles shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." Vivian looked out the window. The coast was just beginning to appear, the horizon painted in blue and gold. Beneath her calm, she could already feel the change taking shape. It wasn't just a landing. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The cabin lights blinked twice, the signal that descent had begun. Seat belts clicked, trays were locked. The usual hum of airline routine buzzed gently through Unity Airlines Flight UA221, but underneath the familiar sequence, something was different. Something was shifting in the air. Captain Mark Bishop felt it too. He had flown for over 2 decades, through thunderstorms over Kansas, tailwind sprints over the Pacific, emergency landings in Denver snowstorms, but never before had his headset buzzed with an internal Tier 0 alert. Never had he received direct instructions from the airline's executive board mid-flight, and never had one passenger not loud, not disruptive, altered the rhythm of an entire aircraft like this. Mark glanced down at the last incoming message. "Do not deplane the passenger in 21C. Gate clearance suspended. Executive team inbound. Prepare for board-level contact upon landing." He blinked. This wasn't just a mistake. This was history in motion. Back in the main cabin, the atmosphere had turned thick, the type of silence that stretched, not from boredom or fatigue, but from the collective knowing that something beyond normal was taking place. Vivian Hart sat in seat 21C, composed as ever, her hands resting on the closed cover of her notebook. The vibration of the aircraft below her was nothing compared to the silent tremor she had already sent through every department of Unity Airlines. She knew the weight of her next moves. She also knew this wasn't just about her. It never had been. A seat was a seat, until it wasn't. Until it symbolized permission, belonging, power, until it was taken not because of policy, but because of perception. Vivian had spent her entire life building something that could never be taken away, not her net worth, not her titles, but her clarity. And in this moment, what hurt wasn't the demotion to 21C, it was the casual confidence of those who believed she would sit there quietly, permanently. That assumption was about to be corrected. Near the front of the plane, Logan Powell stood inside the galley, gripping the edges of his work tablet like it could save him from the wave heading his way. The red alerts on his screen were now flashing executive incident review in progress, await legal audit, suspension likely pending. He exhaled, shallow and unsteady. Kelsey Monroe, beside him, had stopped pretending to be composed. Her eyes flicked between Logan and the business class cabin. landing briefly on Richard Owens still reclining in the seat that had sparked it all. "He doesn't even know what he's sitting in," Kelsey whispered. Logan didn't answer. He couldn't. Maria Salazar, further back in the plane, quietly folded her service apron. Her movements were careful, methodical. She wasn't panicking. She was preparing. There was a difference. As she packed away utensils and secured the service carts, Maria felt something loosen in her chest. For too long, she had watched passengers like Vivian be minimized. Her job, she had always believed, was to be neutral, safe, but neutrality, she now realized, had a cost, and silence had begun to feel like complicity. A few rows ahead, Jasmine Carter was still on her phone. She hadn't posted any video, not yet, but the draft was written, time-stamped, ready. They moved a black CEO from her business class seat for a white man. Turns out she owns part of the airline. Her name is Vivian Hart. Remember it. She hovered over the post button, then hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of respect. This moment didn't belong to her. It belonged to the woman in 21C, and Jasmine wanted to be sure it unfolded the way Vivian needed it to. Ethan Collins, still seated next to Vivian, had said almost nothing in the past 20 minutes. He didn't know what he could offer her that wouldn't feel small, but then Vivian turned toward him with a softness in her eyes. "You look like you want to ask something," she said. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I guess I don't understand how someone like you, with your stature, still has to deal with this." Vivian let the silence breathe for a moment before answering. "Because I live in a world where people confuse visibility with immunity," she said gently. "They think that if you've succeeded, you're protected. But success doesn't cancel out bias. It just changes how it's delivered." Ethan swallowed hard. Vivian continued, her voice calm but direct. "And because people like Logan Powell are trained formally, or not to trust faces like Richard Owens more than faces like mine. The uniform might be policy, but the judgment is personal." Ethan looked down at his hands, then quietly said, "I'm sorry." Vivian reached into her tote and retrieved her phone. Another message had arrived from Malcolm. "Board convening now. Legal has flagged breach. Full discretion granted. We await your command." She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she looked ahead. The coast was nearing. The wheels would be down soon. Behind her. Passengers were restless, not with impatience, but with the instinct that something was shifting right beneath their feet. They didn't know it yet, but they were sitting inside a reckoning. The intercom chimed again. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Maria checked her rows one last time, then returned to the galley, her eyes meeting Kelsey's. "You okay?" Maria asked gently. Kelsey shook her head, blinking quickly. "No, I feel sick. She didn't do anything. I watched it happen, and I didn't speak up." Maria touched her shoulder. "We saw it. Now we decide what we do with that." As the plane began its descent, Logan pulled out his phone and checked Vivian's name again. There it was, her full corporate profile, CEO of Hart Capital Partners, minority stakeholder in Unity Airlines, net worth estimated at nearly $900 million. He closed his eyes. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. In 3A, Richard Owens finally noticed the odd quiet behind him. He turned slightly, confused by the glances, the sideways looks, the phones aimed his way, but it hadn't occurred to him to question his presence in 4A. Privilege rarely recognizes itself in real time. The plane touched down with a soft thump, the runway stretching out beneath them like a clean slate. But inside the cabin, no one moved. No seat belts clicked open. No passengers reached for overhead bins. It was like they were all waiting for something. For someone. And they were. Vivian Hart sat upright, her eyes steady, her body unmoved. She picked up her phone and typed 2 words. Initiate review. At that moment, in Unity Airlines headquarters in Los Angeles. A phone rang on the top floor. The director of partner relations answered, and everything began to move. Gate 42C, where UA221 was scheduled to deplane, was suddenly cleared of all staff, no gate agents, no press, no boarding passengers, only a black car pulling up slowly on the tarmac, its windows tinted, its driver silent, inside the plane. Logan turned to Maria and whispered, "What do we do now?" Maria didn't blink. "We listen," she said. "We follow orders, because for once, they won't be coming from you." And in seat 21C, Vivian Hart closed her notebook and stood up, not rushed, not angry, just ready. The wheels of Unity Airlines Flight UA221 touched down with a whisper-soft thud, followed by the familiar deceleration that pressed passengers gently against their seats. But there was no round of relieved sighs, no clicking of seatbelts, no hustle toward the overhead compartments. Instead, the entire cabin remained still, silent, alert. It was the quiet kind of landing, but not because of the pilot's skill. It was the quiet born of something unspoken, something gathering weight as the aircraft taxied slowly to the gate. In seat 21C, Vivian Hart remained seated, her back straight, her hands calm in her lap. Outside, the morning light spilled across the tarmac at LAX, but inside, every detail was under scrutiny. Passengers glanced across aisles, exchanging looks that said something is happening. A few clutched their phones, screens glowing faintly with Twitter threads and news alerts. Others just watched. At the front of the plane, Logan Powell checked his tablet again, trying not to look panicked. His corporate portal had gone completely dark, no controls, no update functions, only a single locked message blinking in red pendant executive incident review, do not deplane until advised. He stepped into the galley where Captain Mark Bishop stood speaking softly into the internal line. "The jet bridge is held," the captain said, lowering the receiver. "No one's allowed to open the door until further notice." "Who held it?" Logan asked, already knowing the answer. "The board," Bishop said. "Someone high up, really high." Logan swallowed, the weight of consequence pressing heavy against his chest. Back in economy, Maria Salazar stood near row 19, keeping her composure with quiet effort. Her instincts told her that every moment from now on was being watched either from a camera, a live feed, or someone's memory. She glanced down at her service notes, then back at Vivian. The woman still hadn't moved. She didn't need to. She didn't fidget. She didn't look impatient. She radiated something heavier than authority. She radiated consequence. Kelsey Monroe returned from the rear galley, her expression pale. She leaned toward Maria and whispered, "They're talking about it online already." About what Maria asked. "Her," Kelsey said. "People are starting to find out who she is." Maria nodded slowly. "Good." In row 18, Jasmine Carter's phone buzzed nonstop. The post she'd been sitting on was now live. The caption was simple. "They moved a black CEO out of business class so a white man could sit down." She didn't say a word, but she owns part of the airline. She hadn't tagged anyone. She hadn't needed to. The story was spreading on its own. Comments poured in. She didn't yell. That's the part that gets me. She's a legend already, waiting for the fallout. You know it's coming. Unity Airlines just messed with the wrong woman. Jasmine watched the numbers climb 5,000 shares, then 8,000. Someone had already posted a screenshot of Vivian's profile from Forbes. Another had found a photo of her speaking at a conference on board diversity and finance. A verified account tweeted, "You don't bump a heart off a plane, you bump into a lawsuit." She glanced toward 21C. Vivian hadn't touched her phone since the wheels hit the ground. She just waited. And somehow, the longer she waited, the more powerful she became. 2 rows ahead, Sarah Denning leaned toward her husband and whispered, "I think we're witnessing something bigger than a seat change." He nodded. "I think we're witnessing a standard being rewritten." In the cockpit, the captain's headset crackled again. This time it wasn't dispatch or tower. "Captain Bishop, this is Unity Executive Liaison. You are instructed to remain docked. Ground security is inbound. Executive escort will arrive momentarily." Mark raised both eyebrows. He'd flown foreign dignitaries and celebrities before. He'd handled athletes, musicians, even the occasional senator. But this was different. This wasn't a VIP with flash. This was a force with silence. Outside the plane, a black town car pulled onto the tarmac near Gate 42C. Its windows were tinted, its presence unannounced. The gate remained sealed, manned by 2 private security officers in charcoal suits with discreet badges clipped to their belts. Inside the aircraft, the tension mounted as minutes passed without motion. No announcement came, no door opened, and yet no one moved. Not because they were afraid, but because everyone felt the weight of the woman sitting in 21C. Finally. Vivian reached into her tote and removed a slim folio, the same one she always carried into investor meetings. Inside was a crisp contract copy with highlights and annotations. She flipped to a specific page and held it lightly in her lap. Clause B7 Emergency Governance Review, triggered by violation of Equity Compliance Protocol. She had written this clause herself 3 years ago during a late-night board meeting when a junior partner had quietly tried to push her off a panel to make room for a donor. That moment had taught her something critical. If you didn't build protection into the contract, no one would build it for you. Now, 3 years later, it was saving her. Vivian took a steady breath and closed the folio. The moment was coming. Logan Powell, meanwhile, was unraveling. "I'm going to talk to her," he said, standing up. Captain Bishop raised a hand. "I wouldn't if I were you." Logan scoffed. "I have to manage this situation." "This isn't a situation," Bishop said quietly. "This is a response. You already made your move. Now you wait for hers." Logan hesitated, confused by the captain's tone, but then the internal phone rang again. This time it was the airline's legal team. "Mr. Powell, you are instructed not to engage with passenger 21C under any circumstances. You will not approach her. You will not issue apologies. You will wait to be contacted by internal review." The call ended. Logan's stomach turned. Down in row 21, Vivian stood slowly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed, but it sent a subtle wave across the cabin. Every head turned. Every phone lifted. Every whisper fell into hush. Vivian took a single step into the aisle, her gaze sweeping gently toward the front of the plane. Captain Bishop emerged from the cockpit and stepped aside without speaking. She began walking, past row 20, past 15, past 10, each step steady, deliberate, graceful. At row 4, Richard Owens looked up, confused. His face registered recognition too late. He realized she was the woman whose seat he now occupied. He began to rise, awkwardly. Vivian didn't stop walking. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Outside, the jet bridge connected with a soft clunk. The forward door opened. Waiting at the threshold was a woman in a navy blazer, earpiece in place, holding a leather folder. "Ms. Hart," she said, voice low, respectful. "Welcome to Los Angeles." Vivian nodded once, then paused just before stepping out. She turned back to face the cabin. Her voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard it. "Some of you will be asked what you saw today," she said. "I hope you'll remember what it looked like when someone refused to shrink." Then she walked off the plane, and the whole flight exhaled. The jet bridge was empty when Vivian Hart stepped onto it. There were no gate agents, no flashing cameras, no passengers impatiently waiting to board. Just silence. Clean, sterile, waiting silence, the kind that follows power when it moves with certainty. The woman in the navy blazer walked a respectful step behind Vivian. Her name was Alina Chen, head of corporate crisis response at Unity Airlines. She had arrived at the airport 15 minutes after the board meeting was called. She didn't speak unless addressed, didn't explain her presence. She simply followed protocol. And Vivian Hart, with a contract in her hand and calm written across every line of her face, was now protocol. Waiting at the base of the jet bridge was a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver stepped forward, opened the door, then stepped aside again without a word. Vivian didn't enter right away. She turned to Alina. "Has the board convened?" "Yes, ma'am," Alina said. "They're in conference room A, Manhattan office, virtual quorum initiated, legal, compliance, and HR are present. They're waiting on you." Vivian nodded. "Good. I'll speak to them directly. Have the footage prepared, both cabin and body cam." "Yes, ma'am. Legal is compiling it now. Make sure it includes the audio from the gate agents." Alina blinked. "Of course." Vivian looked once toward the aircraft, still docked and sealed. She could see the silhouettes of passengers slowly deplaning, their faces dim behind the layers of glass. Some looked stunned, others curious, a few quietly inspired. She didn't linger. She entered the car. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. A small tablet was already waiting for her on the seat. It displayed a screen showing real-time analytics trending hashtags, rising mentions, headline crawlers from various news outlets. One particular headline was rising faster than the others. "CEO removed from first class by own airline fires crew within the hour." Vivian exhaled slowly. It wasn't the headline that concerned her. It was the tone. She had no interest in turning this into another viral empowerment soundbite. This wasn't about optics. It was about policy, about structure, about consequences. She tapped a message into her phone. Draft internal statement. Clear, factual, no fluff. I want it ready by 5. She signed it simply VH. As the car moved onto the expressway toward downtown Los Angeles, Vivian stared out at the skyline in the distance. She had spent years building bridges between institutions that rarely spoke to women like her with respect. She had learned how to code switch in boardrooms, how to carry herself in rooms where she was the only one of her kind. But this moment was different. Not because of how she'd been treated, but because of who had been watching. This wasn't just a misstep by a flight crew. This was a case study in assumption, and it had unfolded on camera. At Unity Airlines headquarters, a meeting room had already been cleared. Security badges had been revoked for the crew of UA221. HR had suspended internal communications for Logan Powell pending a disciplinary review. Legal was reviewing the application of Clause B7 and calculating its impact. Everyone was moving, and all of it came down to one woman. Vivian arrived exactly 34 minutes after disembarking. Her heels made no sound on the marble floors as she entered the building. No press had been alerted. No photographers were allowed. That was intentional. She hadn't come for show. She had come to finish what had started at 35,000 feet. In the elevator, Alina briefed her again. Conference A is secure. Communications has a draft apology prepared, but I advise them not to publish anything without your review. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Apology for who? Alina hesitated. For the public, mostly. The board wants to get ahead of the narrative. No, Vivian said, her voice even. We don't get ahead of the narrative. We fix the system that created it. Anything less is noise. The elevator doors opened. A young assistant tried to speak but faltered as Vivian passed. Inside conference room EA. 10 faces blinked back at her from the screen board members, legal counsel, HR directors, regional VPs. Some were visibly nervous. Others attempted their usual confident expressions. All of them knew the weight of the name that had just entered the room. Vivian didn't sit at the table. She stood. Let's begin, she said. No one objected. A man in a gray suit, VP of Operations, cleared his throat. Ms. Hart, we're deeply sorry for Vivian raised a hand. This isn't about me, she said. This is about a failure of systems, of training, of assumptions baked into your culture. She reached into her tote and removed the contract. Clause B7 gives my firm discretionary authority to execute emergency governance oversight for matters involving equity compliance. This qualifies. A woman from legal nodded. We've reviewed and confirmed. The footage, the seat reassignment, the documentation trail, it all supports your position. Vivian turned to the screen. 3 things will happen immediately, she said. First, the crew involved will be dismissed for cause. Second, Unity Airlines will initiate a full audit of its customer-facing bias protocols. And third, the leadership bonus structure will be revised to include equity accountability metrics. Permanently, silence. Then the chairman of the board finally spoke. And if the board pushes back, Vivian looked him dead in the eye. Then I pull the funding that bought your last fleet update. Another silence. This time, deeper. She tapped the tablet beside her and projected the cabin footage onto the screen. Logan's voice played clearly. You've been reassigned to economy. Ma'am. The video showed Vivian holding up her boarding pass, the refusal to look at it, the awkwardness of the attendants, the empty compliance. Does anyone in this room believe this would have happened to a white male executive with the same seat assignment? Vivian asked, her voice cool. No one responded. Good, she said. Then we moved forward. Over the next hour, policies were restructured. Compliance roles were reassigned. Training materials were pulled. Vivian issued instructions not as a consultant, but as a co-owner. Her voice didn't waver once. By 4:27 p.m., the meeting ended. Vivian stepped out into the hallway, the weight of the moment finally settling across her shoulders. Not the burden of what had happened, but the momentum of what would follow. In the corridor, a younger employee waited nervously near the window. It was Tia Reynolds. She'd seen everything on the flight, said nothing, but now she couldn't hold it in. "Ms. Hart," she said quietly. Vivian paused, turned. I wanted to say, I saw what they did. I wanted to speak up. I didn't. But now, I want to be part of what changes." Vivian studied her for a long moment, then smiled gently. "You just did." Tia's eyes lit up with quiet gratitude. Vivian walked past her, toward the exit. She didn't need celebration. She didn't want applause. She had what she came for, accountability. Not just for herself, but for the women watching, for the ones who had stayed quiet, for the ones who hadn't been believed, for the ones who'd had seats taken away with no cameras rolling to record it. This wasn't a press moment. This was a cultural correction, and Vivian Hart had just written the first chapter. Vivian Hart stood alone in a temporary office on the executive floor of Unity Airlines' Los Angeles headquarters. The room was sterile, all clean lines and impersonal design glass walls, silver fixtures, and a desk that looked like no one had ever truly used it. It reminded her of the kind of rooms corporations always built for guests they didn't expect to stay long. She didn't mind. She wasn't here to be comfortable. She was here to be clear. A steaming cup of Earl Grey sat untouched beside her laptop. On screen, a blank document blinked back at her. It wasn't writer's block. It was something else. A pause, a reckoning. Vivian took a slow breath and began to type. Subject statement regarding Flight UA221. The words came steadily, without flourish. She wrote not as a victim, not as a figurehead, but as a woman who had spent decades learning how to speak in rooms that pretended not to see her. On the morning of August 22nd, during a routine domestic flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, I was asked to vacate my business class seat, purchased through corporate priority without cause. The reassignment was executed without verification, without courtesy, and without accountability. Vivian paused. She looked out the window where the sky over LA had begun to darken, painted with the soft blush of approaching dusk. She imagined the millions of women who had been asked to move quietly through discomfort, women who had been taught to trade dignity for diplomacy. She was done doing that. She continued typing. Let me be clear. This statement is not about a seat. It is about a system that repeatedly tells women who look like me that they do not belong, no matter how high they climb or how much they contribute. Across the building, the communications team sat in uneasy silence. No one was writing the company's press release. Not today. Word had come directly from the board. Let Ms. Hart write it, and when she's finished, post it exactly as written. No edits, no filters, no legal polish. In HR, the director reviewed the finalized termination packets for Logan Powell, Kelsey Monroe, and Maria Salazar. All three had been suspended effective immediately, pending compliance review. Terminations were to be delivered within 24 hours. The difference was, Maria had already requested to speak with HR, Kelsey had broken down in the crew lounge, and Logan hadn't spoken to anyone since the plane landed. Back in the temporary office, Vivian finished the final paragraph. Power does not always announce itself in headlines or volume. Sometimes it speaks in quiet refusals. I did not raise my voice because my presence is not conditional. It is earned, and I intend to ensure that no one who looks like me is asked to shrink ever again. She read the message once, then again, then she pressed send. 10 minutes later, the post went live across Unity Airlines' official social media accounts, signed Vivian Hart, Interim Executive Equity Compliance Officer, Hart Capital Partners. The internet did not hesitate. Within 20 minutes, the Hart Standard began trending. Jasmine Carter sat in her dorm room, now back on campus, watching it all unfold. She had never seen anything travel this fast. She clicked on the link to Vivian's statement and read every word twice. Then she sent it to her mother with a simple caption. She did it. She really did it. In a coffee shop in Atlanta, Sarah Denning scrolled through the post on her tablet. She had flown dozens of times in her life, platinum status, hotel upgrades, club lounge access, but it hadn't protected her from being asked, once, to step aside for a last-minute VIP. She hadn't had the words then, but Vivian had them now. Sarah read the post again, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Inside Unity's headquarters, the CEO of the airline, Elliot Rhodes, finally responded. He was a man known for strategy, for corporate vision, for reading market trends before they emerged. But this was no market trend. This was a movement with a name. And it wasn't going away. He called an emergency board session. "We can't spin this," he said bluntly. "We follow it." He issued 3 executive orders before the meeting ended. 1. All customer-facing staff must complete anti-bias recertification within 30 days. 2. All executive compensation packages will include a 20% equity-based metric. 3. A third-party reporting system will be launched for passengers and employees to report discrimination in real time. He called them the Hart Directives. Vivian didn't ask for credit. She just wanted permanence. Hours later, as the city settled into night, she finally left the building. No cameras followed her. She didn't need the optics. But when she stepped into her car, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Maria Salazar. "I just wanted you to know. I froze because I was scared. I've been told my whole career to follow orders, but I saw what they did to you, and it changed something in me. I'm not asking for my job back. Just wanted you to know that you were heard." Vivian stared at the screen. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes and thought of all the times someone had written her off without learning her name. All the women who had been passed over, sat down, silenced. Then she typed back, "You were scared. I understand. But silence is a choice. Let's both choose better next time." The message sent, a few blocks away, in a small apartment. Kelsey Monroe read the statement again for the 5th time. She wasn't proud of how she'd behaved. She hadn't questioned Logan. She'd followed the chain of command. But now, with her future in limbo, the only thing louder than her fear was her regret. She stared at her phone for a long time, then opened her email. She began to type. "Ms. Hart, if you ever open this, I want to apologize directly. I didn't protect you. I didn't speak up. But I am learning. I promise you that. I am learning." She hit send. It didn't undo what had happened, but it was a beginning. By morning, over 1 million people had read Vivian's statement. News anchors quoted it word for word. Talk shows dedicated entire segments to it. Corporate boards across industries scrambled to recheck their protocols. And in Washington, D.C., a Department of Transportation task force met to discuss whether the Hart Standard could serve as a model for national aviation equity guidelines. back in Los Angeles. Vivian sat in her hotel room, sipping the tea she never drank earlier. The sky outside was dark, but the city pulsed with quiet energy. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel finished. She just felt ready. She opened her notebook and wrote, "This isn't justice, but it's the start of memory." She folded the page and placed it beside the boarding pass from seat 4A. Then she closed her eyes and exhaled. She had landed, and so had the truth. Morning came to Los Angeles quietly, golden light creeping over concrete and glass. But inside Unity Airlines headquarters, the atmosphere was anything but calm. From the top floors down to regional offices, staff were glued to screens, eyes scanning Vivian Hart's statement again and again. Her words were posted in break rooms, printed in HR lobbies, circulating in executive inboxes with subject lines like "Mandatory, please read." At 7:30 a.m., the internal systems pushed out a notification titled "Policy Update, Immediate Implementation Required." The email listed 3 key directives: compliance certification, compensation realignment, and anonymous reporting. But it wasn't just the content that struck employees, it was the sender. From Vivian Hart, title, Interim Executive Equity Compliance Officer, Signature Hart Capital Partners. Her name now sat in the system alongside every division head, not as a consultant, not as a guest, but as someone with full authority. This wasn't symbolic change, this was structural. In the training center in Denver, a class of new hires had just begun orientation when the announcement hit. The instructor paused mid-sentence, blinked at her tablet, then cleared her throat awkwardly. "So, we're pausing the current training materials," she said. "There's been a leadership directive. We'll be replacing everything with updated content by end of day." One trainee raised a hand. "Is this about the CEO woman on the plane?" The instructor nodded slowly. "Yes, it's about her. And what she did. Everything's changing now. Back in Los Angeles." Vivian walked into the boardroom just before 9. Ma'am, she wasn't wearing a suit today. No heels, no statement earrings, just a soft blouse, low flats, and the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. Elliot Rhodes, CEO of Unity Airlines, stood when she entered. "So," he said, trying to sound composed, "we've received over 40,000 responses to the statement. Public support is massive. But it's not just that. We've also heard from former staff, customers, even regulators. DOT's office has formally requested a meeting with you." Vivian took her seat at the head of the table. "I'll speak with them," she said. "After we finish what we started here." Elliot nodded. "Understood." The rest of the board filed in. Legal, operations, HR, communications. Each of them came carrying folders, tablets, nervous glances. They were used to overseeing progress. Today, they were answering to it. Vivian leaned forward. "We're not here to perform," she began. "We're here to build a framework. And frameworks don't start with slogans, they start with systems." She turned to the head of training. "How long will it take to deploy new certification modules?" The woman responded quickly. "We can get a draft live in 10 days. Final version in 2 weeks. Too slow," Vivian said. "Make it 6 days. Strip out the fluff. Center the case studies on lived experience, not hypothetical scenarios. Use what happened on Flight 221 as the foundation." The woman nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Vivian turned to the HR rep. "What's the current process for handling bias complaints?" standard reporting through department supervisors or online forms. He said, "And how often are those reviewed quarterly?" Vivian didn't respond right away. She let the room sit in that silence. "That's not a system. That's a stall," she said. "We moved to real-time routing through an independent firm. No internal gatekeepers, no filters. If someone files a complaint, it's reviewed within 24 hours. If it involves staff, it's logged against their certification record. No exceptions." She turned next to the compensation committee. "I want a full revision of leadership KPIs by Friday. 20% of all bonuses must now tie directly to equity performance measurable, not vague. If you can't measure it, you don't earn from it." The committee chair leaned forward. "That might meet resistance from some of the executive team." Vivian looked him straight in the eye. "Then they can resist without a bonus." A hush swept across the room. No one challenged her. She wasn't asking. She was executing. At one point, during the meeting, Vivian's phone buzzed. She checked the screen. A message from Tia Reynolds, the young employee who had approached her quietly after the incident. "Morning, Ms. Hart. Just wanted you to know I signed up to join the Internal Compliance Volunteer Group. We're creating a list of recommendations from the staff level. Real feedback, not just reports. Thought you should hear it from me first." Vivian smiled gently. She typed back, "Thank you, Tia." That's how culture shifts when people step up, not when they're told to. "I'll read every word." Back in the conference room, Elliot leaned toward Vivian. "There's talk that other airlines are watching, even our competitors. Some are considering adopting your policies preemptively." Vivian folded her arms. "Good," she said. "Let them." In the hallway outside, staff were starting to whisper about something called the Hart effect. It wasn't just a trend. It was a realignment, a recalibration of how authority could look, sound, and act. Vivian's presence had begun to redefine what leadership meant, not loud, not boastful, but thorough, principled, and above all, unmoved by fear. She left the meeting just before noon. Her work for the day wasn't done, but the foundation was built. She stepped into the main atrium where a group of mid-level managers had gathered for an impromptu town hall. When she appeared, they went quiet. One woman raised her hand. "Ms. Hart, what do we tell our teams when they ask why all of this happened so fast?" Vivian thought for a moment. Then she said, "Simply because waiting quietly hasn't worked." No applause followed, just silence, but this time it was the kind that builds something new. That afternoon, a reporter from a national business outlet requested an interview. Her team declined. "She's not given sound bites." Her assistant replied, "She's building policies." At 3:00 p.m., HR sent the official termination letters to Logan Powell, Kelsey Monroe, and Maria Salazar. Each letter was precise, free of flourish, based strictly on documented protocol violations. But Maria received something else too, a second letter, not a termination, but an offer. Vivian had intervened. The offer came with the condition Maria would join the new Equity Training Task Force. Her voice would be part of the solution. It wasn't forgiveness. It was accountability in motion. Maria cried when she read it, not because she was spared, but because she was trusted to help fix what had broken. Vivian returned to her hotel that evening with aching feet and a full inbox. She didn't check the trending page. She didn't open news sites. She sat by the window with her tea and opened her notebook again. She wrote, "Change isn't measured in headlines. It's measured in policies that hold after the moment has passed." She folded the note and slipped it beside her original boarding pass seat, 4A, a seat she no longer needed. She had taken something better with her when she walked off that plane. She had taken the future. 3 days after Vivian Hart walked off Flight UA221, the ripple effects had already reached places she never intended. At a high school in Detroit, a 16-year-old girl named Ayanna sat in her journalism class watching a clip of Vivian's statement projected on the smartboard. Her teacher had paused on the words, "Power does not always announce itself in headlines or volume. Sometimes it speaks in quiet refusals." Ayanna stared at the screen, something sparking in her chest. The last time she tried to speak up when a substitute teacher had mispronounced her name and then laughed. She had been told not to make a scene. But watching Vivian not yelling, not begging, just standing firm, something shifted in how Ayanna saw herself across the country. The Washington Post ran a Sunday feature titled "The Woman Who Sat Still and Moved an Industry." The article dove into Vivian's career, her quiet influence on board diversity policy, and how a single flight had exposed the fragility of so-called progress. It also included interviews with passengers from Flight UA221, including Jasmine Carter. "I didn't know who she was," Jasmine told the reporter, "but I knew she mattered. You could feel it in how she didn't flinch." Vivian read the piece early that morning, seated by the window in her hotel suite. The city moved slowly beneath her commuters. Construction, lives continuing. For everyone else, this was just news. But for her, it was the beginning of something far less glamorous and far more difficult, maintaining the momentum when the cameras turned away. She sipped her tea, then opened her inbox. One email stood out: subject request for meeting Federal Aviation Equity Council. The message was brief but direct. They wanted to speak to her about creating a national model for anti-bias passenger protections, beginning with an oversight committee led by an independent chair. They wanted that chair to be her. Vivian closed her eyes. The weight of it pressed against her, not in a crushing way, but in a way that told her just how much hadn't been done yet. An hour later, she walked through Unity Airlines' headquarters, now fully operational under her interim guidance. Employees no longer whispered when she passed. Now they greeted her, not with fear, with respect, with something else, to hope. She passed by a common area where a group of young employees had posted a large whiteboard titled, "What Equity Looks Like to Us." Sticky notes filled the surface. Being able to speak up without fear. Knowing my manager actually listens. Hiring people who reflect the passengers we serve. Being promoted for my work, not just my compliance. Vivian paused to read each one. Slowly. She didn't comment. She just nodded and kept walking. In the executive lounge, she met with Alina Chen, who now served as her operations liaison. "We've got buy-in from 2 partner airlines," Alina reported. "They've asked for access to our training modules once finalized." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Tell them they're welcome to observe, but they'll need to build their own. Copying us won't change their culture. They have to do the hard work themselves." Alina smiled. Understood. Vivian tapped her pen thoughtfully on the folder in her lap. "Any update on Richard Owens?" Alina nodded. "He issued a formal apology last night, said he didn't realize what was happening until after the incident, offered to donate to an aviation equity scholarship fund. Quiet, but sincere." Vivian considered that. Let's redirect it toward staff development. Scholarships for employees who want to move into leadership but haven't had access. I'll draft the framework," Alina said. That afternoon, a call came through from a restricted number. Vivian answered without hesitation. The voice on the line was calm. Older, southern drawl with a lawyer's precision. "Ms. Hart, this is Judge Caleb Whitmore. I sit on the Federal Aviation Oversight Board. I've read your rulings," Vivian said. "You wrote the dissent in the airline seating equality case." He chuckled. "You have a long memory." "I have a long archive," she replied. The judge turned serious. "We'd like to invite you to testify next month. The hearings will explore federal equity mandates for commercial aviation. Your experience on Flight UA221 and your response since make you the most compelling witness we have." Vivian didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." After the call, she returned to her temporary office and pulled out the folio again. Not the contract, but a handwritten note her father had given her years ago. "Remember, baby girl, the ones who talk loud don't always lead. Sometimes it's the ones who know when to wait, when to walk, and when to write the new rules." He had been a teacher, never made it past middle management, but he had taught her the value of stillness, the force of watching everything and missing nothing. And now, she was writing the new rules. Later that evening, Maria Salazar walked into the Unity Training Center, unsure what to expect. The HR manager had said Vivian wanted her involved in the redesign process. She'd assumed it was a formality, a polite gesture before letting her go quietly. But when she stepped inside, a young facilitator handed her a name badge, Maria Salazar Equity Co-Chair Flight Crew Experience. Maria blinked. What now?" The facilitator smiled. "Ms. Hart said we needed people who'd been there. You were there." Maria stared at the name tag for a long moment, then nodded. She sat at the head of a small round table. Beside her were two other flight attendants, a gate agent, and a ground supervisor. None of them had ever sat on a policy committee. But tonight, they were writing the future of how their airline would treat every single passenger, regardless of skin color, seat number, or class. Vivian didn't attend the meeting. She didn't need to. Her work wasn't to speak in every room. It was to make sure every room had someone speaking who hadn't been heard before. As the sun set on Los Angeles, a message pinged across Unity's internal platform. From Vivian Hart. Subject: honor and standard. We do not rise to power because we demand control. We rise when our standards become unavoidable. I will not thank you for doing what should have been done long ago. I will thank you for choosing to do it now, with your eyes open and your courage engaged. Let this be the place where equity is not a concept, but a contract. She didn't sign it with a title, just Vivian. And that was all they needed. The hearing room in Washington, D.C. wasn't packed with cameras or buzzing media the way you might expect. Instead, it was quiet, almost austere. The walls were lined with framed photos of past aviation leaders, and the long oak table at the front bore the seal of the Federal Aviation Equity Council. Only a few rows of seats were filled with industry executives, legal observers, union representatives, and two students from Howard University seated nervously in the back. They had come just to see her. Vivian Hart entered without fanfare. She wore a simple black dress and a navy blazer. Her only accessory was a silver pin her father had given her in college, shaped like an open book. She didn't need flash. Her presence was the statement. The chair of the council, Judge Caleb Whitmore tapped his gavel lightly. We now call Miss Vivian Hart to present her remarks. Vivian stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it once, and took a breath. Madam Chair, honorable members of the council, thank you for allowing me to speak. She let her eyes meet theirs one by one, not to intimidate, but to connect. My name is Vivian Hart. I am CEO of Hart Capital Partners and currently serve as Interim Executive Equity Compliance Officer for Unity Airlines, following an incident aboard Flight UA221. She paused. No one moved. I was removed from a first-class seat I had rightfully purchased and assigned. I was told I had been mistakenly placed there. When I showed my boarding pass, I was ignored. When I calmly asked for clarity, I was brushed aside. She looked directly at the council now. This is not a story about a seat. It's about the cost of assumptions, the human cost. Several members nodded. One wrote something down. The students in the back leaned forward. Vivian continued, her voice steady. I have the privilege of fighting back with institutional power. Most do not, and for too long. Commercial aviation has operated under the illusion that customer equality begins at the gate. It does not. It begins the moment a name is entered into the system. And in that system, patterns repeat, silent, invisible, until someone calls them out. She reached into her folder and held up the boarding pass for seat 4A. This pass has become a symbol, but I want to make something clear. I do not want symbolism. I want systems. She clicked the remote in her hand, and behind her, a large monitor displayed a timeline. April passenger with Muslim name removed for random screening. June black couple in first class asked to show boarding passes twice, while white passengers were not. August UA221 incident. These are not isolated. They are institutional. Not because people are inherently biased, but because procedures allow bias to go unchecked. Vivian concluded her remarks with quiet gravity. I'm not asking for punishment. I'm demanding prevention. Let us create a standard not for PR, but for people. Let the skies be fair for everyone. When she stepped back from the microphone, the room was still. Then Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. Ms. Hart, thank you. You've given us not just a story, but a blueprint. Vivian sat back down, her hands calmly folded in her lap. The next speaker, a senior executive from a competing airline, looked visibly uncomfortable following her. His pre-written statement now seemed hollow in comparison. As the hearing continued, messages began to flood her inbox. Union leaders, college deans, a veteran pilot, a mother of 4, and one from a woman named Lisa, a flight attendant who had served for 27 years. I cried reading your words. Lisa wrote, I've seen this happen. I've been too afraid to speak. Thank you for saying what so many of us have carried. Vivian read it 3 times, then forwarded it to Alina Chen. Let's reach out. She might be valuable in training design. That evening, back in her hotel suite overlooking the Capitol Dome, Vivian sat alone with a bowl of soup and a soft jazz record spinning quietly in the background. She wasn't celebrating, she was processing, because she knew something others didn't. This wasn't the climax of the story, it was the middle. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Tia Reynolds. They just made it official. The message read, all first-class training now includes the Hart Standard, mandatory for crew, agents, and management. It's real. Vivian smiled to herself. She responded simply, good, keep your eyes open. Tia, you're going to lead one day. Tia's reply came instantly. Only if I have mentors like you. Vivian set the phone down and walked to the window. Below her, the city was alive with lights and quiet movement. Somewhere, people were boarding planes. Some were nervous, some were exhausted. Some were wondering if they'd be judged for how they looked, how they spoke, or how they dressed. Most would never know her name, but they would feel the shift she had helped ignite. The next morning, Vivian met with a small group of aviation reform advocates. They had flown in from Atlanta, San Diego, and Chicago. All of them had stories. All of them had scars. One of them, a former baggage handler named Keith, told his story haltingly. I saw them target passengers, people who looked like me. I didn't say anything. I was scared. But after what you did, I'm ready. Vivian nodded. Then let's write the policies that would have protected them. They worked for hours, building frameworks not based on punishment, but on responsibility, on education, on transparency. The goal wasn't revenge, it was reform. And when the work was done, Vivian gathered their drafts into a thick binder and placed her hand on top. This is our seat at the table, she said quietly, and we're not giving it back. Later that week, the Federal Aviation Equity Council released its first statement in response to the hearings. We recognize systemic bias as a safety and service issue, and we commit to addressing it at every level of commercial aviation. The Hart standard was formally added to the national training guidance for all U.S.-based airlines. Vivian didn't hold a press conference. She didn't post a victory photo. Instead, she walked quietly through the airport, past Gate C-19 where it had all started, and watched a new training video play on a small employee screen. It opened with the words, "Bias does not need a voice. It needs a system to hide in. Let's take that system apart." Vivian exhaled, deeply and quietly, then turned and walked toward her gate. By the time Vivian Hart returned to Chicago, the air in the city had shifted. It wasn't the weather. It was the sense of motion, the quiet momentum of change that had been seeded and was now blooming across terminals, boardrooms, and policy roundtables. At O'Hare Airport, near the Unity Airlines check-in counters, a new digital sign had gone live just 2 days before. It displayed rotating messages between boarding schedules and weather updates. But every 5 minutes, a quote appeared in clean white text over a black background. Dignity is not a privilege of class. It is a birthright. The Hart Standard. No names, no fanfare, just the words. Travelers paused to read it. Some nodded, some smiled, and some, like the middle-aged black man in a weathered leather jacket who had never dared ask for pre-boarding assistance before, walked up to the counter and said, "I think I qualify for early boarding." "Right." The agent, newly trained, smiled warmly. "Yes, sir. Thank you for flying with us." On the 24th floor of Hart Capital Partners, Vivian walked into her office for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. The sunlight flooded the room through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything looked untouched, yet nothing felt the same. Her assistant, June, was already at her desk with a stack of messages and a large binder. "This came in from the DOT," June said, handing her a sealed envelope. "And this," she continued, gesturing toward the binder, "is the first draft of the National Aviation Bias Report. They've credited you as a contributing editor." Vivian accepted it with a quiet nod. She sat down slowly, adjusting the familiar chair beneath her. She ran her fingers over the surface of her desk wood, polished, silent. She opened the DOT envelope and unfolded the letter. Dear Ms. Hart, in recognition of your leadership following the events of Flight UA221 and your role in crafting equity-first reform, the Department of Transportation formally invites you to serve as Special Policy Advisor on Aviation Civil Rights. There was more. Legal language, signatures, a timeline. But Vivian set it aside. She closed her eyes for a long moment, letting the weight of that invitation settle. Not long ago, she had been told to leave her seat. Today, the nation's top transportation agency had offered her a seat that couldn't be revoked, a seat she didn't have to prove she'd earned. Across town, Maria Salazar stepped onto a Unity training stage, clipboard in hand. Her name was now on the title slide of the Flight Equity and Passenger Experience program. As she looked out at the crowd of new recruits, she took a steadying breath. I used to think compliance was about not making waves. She began. But it turns out, real compliance means ensuring nobody else has to drown. One of the new trainees raised her hand, her voice nervous. Did you ever get scared, like of losing everything? Maria looked her in the eyes. Absolutely. I was terrified, but now I know fear doesn't mean you stop. It just means you're awake. At Hart Capital. Vivian hosted a small gathering that afternoon. Just 15 people, no media, no branding, just allies, reformers, advocates. Among them was Sarah Denon, the older woman who had been in seat 20D on the flight, who had come to say thank you in person. You said what none of us could, Sarah told her, and you didn't yell, you didn't throw punches, but you still hit harder than anyone. Vivian laughed softly. I wasn't trying to hit, I was trying to hold the line. Later, Tia Reynolds joined the gathering, beaming. She had recently been promoted to internal strategy liaison. She stood beside Vivian now, energized, eyes bright. I wanted you to know, Tia said, I got accepted into the graduate leadership program. Full tuition. Unity is funding it as part of the new internal access program you helped design. Vivian hugged her without a word. That evening, Vivian sat at home, finally alone. Her space was quiet, filled with the scent of the jasmine candle she always burned after long days. She poured herself a glass of water and walked to the bookshelf. She reached for her father's journal, the one he had kept until the day he passed. She flipped it open and found a note he had scribbled during a long-ago parent-teacher conference. They don't see her yet, but they will. Vivian traced the faded ink with her fingertip, then gently folded the page and closed the book. At that same hour, a flight departed from Los Angeles and bound for Chicago. In seat 4A, a young black woman named Candace settled in, headphones in her lap, backpack tucked beneath her feet. She hadn't expected much when she booked her ticket, but when she boarded, the flight attendant had smiled and said, "Welcome, Ms. Moore. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." There had been no double take, no questions about her boarding group, no assumption she was lost. Candace didn't know the full story of Flight UA221, but she had read the headlines. She had seen the clip of the woman in navy blue who didn't budge. She pulled out a notepad and scribbled one line, because she sat still. I could sit here, back in Chicago. Vivian lay in bed, not yet asleep. Her phone buzzed softly one last time. It was from Jasmine Carter. "Hey, Ms. Hart, I'm writing my college entrance essay about you. Hope that's okay." Vivian typed back, "Only if you send me a copy when it's done." Jasmine's reply came back with a heart emoji and a photo of her desk textbooks piled high, a post-it stuck to the wall. It read, "Quiet does not mean small." Vivian smiled, placed the phone on her nightstand, and turned off the light. The sky outside her window was endless and dark, dotted with planes headed to cities she'd never see, filled with people she'd never meet. But they would be safer, they would be seen, and for the first time in a long time, the sky felt honest. The snow was light that morning in Chicago, not enough to halt flights, but enough to blur the skyline behind drifting white veils. Vivian Hart stood at the window of her office on the 24th floor, sipping a cup of coffee and watching the city slowly come awake. The world had changed, yet the streets still carried people to their trains and buses. Life moved forward, whether history noticed or not. But she noticed. She noticed the way silence had finally been broken, not with noise, but with consequence, with new policies, new attitudes, and most of all with new people stepping forward to lead. Vivian turned from the window and walked over to her desk. A black folder lay waiting, delivered overnight from Unity Airlines. It contained the final quarterly report from the Equity Compliance Division she helped create. She opened it slowly, scanning the pages. Incident reports. Down 63% passenger satisfaction among black travelers. Up 42%. Training completion rate, 98.7% leadership diversity at the regional level. Doubled since last quarter. She read every statistic. But more than that, she read the margins, the handwritten notes from employees, the embedded quotes from trainees, the story of a gate agent in Boston who now mentored recruits from underrepresented communities. Vivian closed the folder gently, then looked up at the small frame photo on her shelf. It was from years ago, her father, in a worn cardigan, standing in front of a chalkboard, his eyes kind but serious. You never fight for a seat just to sit. You fight so others can stand. The words were etched into the bottom of the frame. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was June, her assistant. "You have a visitor." "From the dot." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "I thought that meeting was virtual." June smiled. She insisted on coming in person. Vivian nodded and rose from her chair. Moments later, a woman in a tailored navy coat stepped in. She introduced herself as Dana LeClaire, Director of Transportation Equity Policy. "I just came from O'Hare," Dana said. "They installed your quote across Terminal 3. Beneath it, there's a glass case with your boarding pass from Flight UA221. Vivian blinked. "I never donated that." Dana smiled. "You didn't. A passenger found it on the ground after the flight. Turns out, you dropped it when you stood up that day. They mailed it anonymously to the airline 2 weeks later with a note." She reached into her briefcase and handed Vivian a printed copy. Vivian unfolded the note carefully. She didn't need this anymore. She gave us all a new boarding pass instead. Passenger 19A. Vivian stared at the page for a long time. After Dana left, she sat alone with the note, the snow still drifting outside. Something inside her softened, but not from relief. From quiet acknowledgement, she had become more than a passenger. She had become a path. Later that afternoon, Vivian attended a leadership panel at Northwestern University. The auditorium was packed. Students, professors, community leaders. She wasn't the only speaker, but she was the one they had come to hear. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the podium with calm confidence. "I didn't plan to become a symbol," she began. I didn't want to lead a movement. All I wanted was my seat. A few students chuckled gently, but the air was reverent. But that's the truth, isn't it? She continued. Justice often begins in small things, in boarding passes, in name tags, in how someone looks at you when you speak. She scanned the room, her voice quiet but deliberate. It would have been easy to yell, to threaten, to demand revenge. But I didn't need to win a fight. I needed to hold the line. Vivian paused, then said something she hadn't told anyone before. When I was 12, my mother was asked to leave a restaurant because the hostess assumed she was trying to sneak in. She was a teacher. She had just come from work, but she didn't argue. She just lowered her head and left. I never forgot that moment. The auditorium was silent. I didn't get my seat back for me. I got it back for her. That night, after returning home, Vivian opened her laptop and began drafting her final memo as Unity's interim executive equity officer. Her contract was set to conclude by spring, and she had already begun preparing for the transition to the next leader, someone new, someone ready. She titled the memo Continuity and Courage in it. She outlined key goals for the next phase leadership inclusion audits, a rotating council of flight attendants to review policy effectiveness, and a confidential portal for passenger feedback linked directly to executive action. But at the end of the memo, she wrote something different. Not a directive, a reflection. I did not become powerful because I sat in seat 4A. I became powerful because I stayed in it when asked to leave. Let that be our legacy. Not in defiance, but in dignity. She signed it simply Vivian. The next morning, she visited Unity's training center one last time before her departure. As she walked through the facility, she was greeted by staff she had never met, but who somehow felt familiar. One of them, a man in his 40s named Reggie, stopped her in the hallway. My daughter applied to be a pilot. He said, she saw you speak at her high school. Said, if she can fly through that storm, I can fly through mine. Vivian smiled softly. Tell her to aim higher than the clouds. Tell her to aim for policy. As she stepped outside into the sunlight, she took one last look at the Unity Airlines building. Its glass exterior gleamed in the morning light, but inside it now held more than structure. It held story, and systems, and voices that would no longer be ignored. Vivian pulled out her phone and sent one final message. To Tia Reynolds. I'm leaving the post soon. The baton's not mine to carry forever. It's yours now. Make it lighter for the next hand. Tia replied almost instantly. I won't let it fall. Vivian smiled and slipped the phone into her coat pocket, then turned toward her car. Her steps quiet, steady. She no longer needed to fight for a seat. She had changed the entire cabin, and far above her, somewhere in the sky, Flight UA221 moved through the clouds toward a future she had helped rewrite one policy, one voice, and one seat at a time. Vivian Hart didn't raise her voice. She didn't retaliate. She simply remained seated and forced an entire system to stand accountable. This story isn't just about a boarding pass. It's about generations of people who've been told to wait, to move, to be quiet. It's about the power of quiet strength and the reckoning it can bring. Because in a world that too often values privilege over principle, dignity becomes an act of revolution. As we close this chapter, we're left with a powerful truth sometimes. The strongest protest is the one made without ever leaving your seat. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it made you feel seen, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. There are more voices to uplift, more stories to tell, and more truths to confront. Because the sky may be vast, but justice must fly in every cabin. Stay tuned for more powerful stories where courage meets conscience right here. We'll see you in the next one.